Please join me again in thanking the USS America Color Guard, Ms. Nina Church, and Lieutenant John David Luckenstein. It's now my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for the day, Dr. Andrea Armani. She received her BA in physics from the University of Chicago and her PhD in applied physics and a minor in biology from the California Institute of Technology. She is currently the Floor Early Career Chair in Engineering and an Associate Professor of Chemical Engineering and Material Science at the University of Southern California. She began her scientific career winning regional high school science fairs and topic-specific awards from the Office of Naval Research and the American Chemical Society. Since that time, she has received several awards, including the O&R Young Investigator Award, the P-Case from President Obama, and the NIH Director's New Inventor Award. She was also named the Young Global Leader by the World Economic Forum. Please welcome Dr. Andrea Armani.
In high school. Awesome. Hello? Yes. Yay. I'm not going to start over again. Sorry. Everyone in the front heard me. Everyone in the back, talk to people in the front. Okay. It'll be good. It'll be like a mixer. Okay. So I recently found out I have 50 minutes to speak. We're going to see how this goes. I'm joking. What we're going to do is ask questions at the end. So I'm giving you a heads up. Think of questions, which means you need to pay attention now, even though it's like 9 in the morning, so that you have questions at the end. If you don't have questions, I will ask you questions. So it'll be like school. Yeah. I'm a professor. I'm really good at asking questions, hard ones. Okay, so I'm going to tell 2 anecdotes, 2 stories about my life that hopefully will be like parables and you'll learn something, assuming I do a good job. So the first one is from middle school. First, I'm 5'2", in case you can't tell. I weigh ballpark 105 pounds. When I was in middle school, I was even shorter and I weighed less. And I decided I wanted to try out for the field team, right? There's track and field, and I wanted to do field. Specifically, I wanted to throw the discus. Yeah, right? So I did. I was actually pretty good at it in middle school. So in middle school, everyone was really good at like chucking the discus. In other words, you would stand in one spot and just like throw it as hard as you could. But I had done ballet, so I was really good at spinning and then throwing it. So anyone who's taken physics, they understand that I could get that extra momentum and then leverage that to get my discus to go farther. So I was able to compensate for the fact that I didn't weigh very much and I was super short, and all of the other throwers would comment that I could be the discus. Yeah, super supportive. But I could actually win sometimes. So I learned that, having a really good understanding of physics and having a really good understanding of, why and how the discus actually moved and how it actually, was able to get that trajectory and actually make it through the air and go farther, that actually enabled me to overcome brute force and overcome the fact that I was like 4'11". But that kind of stuck with me when I went to high school and when I went to college and when I started thinking about kind of these lifelong challenges of, how am I going to succeed? And when I come across these really hard challenges now, obviously I no longer throw the discus. because that's not my career. I kind of stopped when I hit high school, and everybody else figured out how to spin, and they were stronger, and my advantage went away. But that's okay. I excelled in other things, not really athletic things. I was too tall to be a gymnast and too short to do pretty much everything else. I'm like the black hole of athletes. That's fine. So then, when I went to high school, I started looking at other things. For all of you here, I'm sure you're super smart and you like going to school and you love class, right? Yeah. I really didn't like going to class. So I grew up in Memphis. Memphis is, really good in the upper percentile for things like obesity. Highest homicide rate per capita. Also, worst education system. So going to class wasn't really, I decided, keep in mind I was like 15, it wasn't a good use of my time. Not saying this is true, but I decided I didn't really need to be there. So I signed up for everything that allowed me to miss class. In doing so, I did a lot of extracurricular activities. Mock trial, Model UN, science fair, math counts, yearbook, newspaper, golf. Yeah. Literally any activity that meant I could miss class, I signed up for it. I missed so many days of school my senior year due to extracurricular activities, they almost didn't let me graduate, which is very impressive in a kind of inverted way. But some of those activities actually weren't offered at my high school. But I was so dedicated, as my parents say, stubborn. It's positive, as you will all learn. I was so dedicated to missing school that I actually had to go to other schools in order to do some of these activities. For example, my school actually didn't have a Model UN Youth Ledge or mock trial team because of the wonderful academic system in Memphis. So I actually had to apply to go to other schools to be on their teams. And doing things like mock trial and youth ledge and Model UN are really important. So I loved science in high school and I loved science in college. And I did all those activities because I didn't really like class, but I didn't necessarily see the point in doing them in terms of being a scientist or an engineer. But it's incredibly important to be able to speak in front of an audience. All of you. And if I hadn't done those activities in high school, I would not be confident to speak in front of an audience. And I would not be comfortable to speak in front of an audience. And in my job now, I have to teach class every day, which is the same thing as speaking in front of an audience. And it's the same thing as being able to take questions and being able to take criticism in front of an audience, because your students are an audience. Similarly, I have to go to conferences and present my research in front of an audience. And I'm not sure which audience is actually more critical, my students or my colleagues. Some days it feels like my students perhaps are more critical. They make fun when I make comments about record players. But it's okay. They make me feel like I'm ancient. I'm not that old. It's fine. They're very hurtful. When all of you go to college, don't be hurtful. Be nice to your professors. We really just want you to succeed. That's really all we want. So having all of these experiences as a high school student meant when I went to college, which is my last story. When I went to college, I was a little bit better prepared in terms of the humanities. But then when it came to the sciences and math, I was incredibly ill-prepared because my high school did not have AP classes. And while I could petition to be on something like mock trial or youth ledge at another high school, I could not petition to take calculus. So I was a physics major as an undergrad. Going into physics AP without taking calculus AP is really hard. And that's an understatement. However, I was very dedicated. I was going to make this happen. And so the first week in class, I went and talked to the professor and explained that I hadn't taken calculus, but I really wanted to be a physics major. And he told me that I clearly did not deserve to be a physics major. And so I left his office, and I went back to my dorm room, and I first cried for like a solid 2 hours. And then I was like, you know what? Screw him. I deserve to be a physics major. And this is where the stubbornness kicks in. So stubbornness is not necessarily a bad thing. It may be a bad thing when you're like 3 years old or 5 years old from your parents' perspective. But I essentially have a will that's something akin to like chemically protected titanium running up my backbone. So I was like, okay, so I need to learn calculus clearly in parallel. I'm gonna go see a tutor, and they can teach this to me, and I'll make this happen. So I went to the tutoring center, and I met a tutor named Ward Lopes, who was a PhD student, like a fifth-year physics PhD student, and I went and saw him every single day. And he is the most patient person on the planet, and he and I are still friends, like 15 years later. So after about like week 8 in the quarter, which is pretty much 2 weeks before the final exam, I was doing much better. And he asked me if I wanted to have a research position under him in his research group, which for a physics undergrad is the holy grail. In order to get into grad school and get a PhD, you need to do research as an undergrad. Usually you don't get one of these until your junior year. And I was a freshman who started off their freshman year basically failing physics. And he saw that I had the ability, even if I didn't have the background, but it was there. It was there perhaps encrusted dirt, buried underneath a bunch of stuff, but it was still there. And so he took me under his wings and made it happen. So if you come across something in your life that is super hard and you don't think you can do it, and people around you tell you you can't do it, just look for support, right? There are always people around you. They're the naysayers, and there will always be naysayers. It's really easy to tell someone they can't do something. It's much harder to tell someone they can and then help. So always look for those people who are willing to support you, and those people are always out there. So thank you very much, and now you have to have questions. Oh, and there are runners at the edges who have mics. So I saw a hand over here.
Is this on?
If you'd never done calculus or advanced science, why did you want to be a physics major?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. So I took normal science classes like biology, chemistry, and physics. And I took biology my freshman year, and I took and after biology, I wanted to be a biologist. Like I loved it. And then I took chemistry my sophomore year, and I loved chemistry, and therefore I wanted to be a chemist. And then I took physics my junior year, and I loved physics, so I wanted to be a physicist. And that was the last one I took. So that's why, honestly. So in my family, there are no scientists. My parents are both in business. My parents both graduated from college. On my mom's side of the family, no one else graduated from college. Some didn't graduate from high school. On my dad's side of the family, about half graduated from college in various non-science fields. So there wasn't really anyone to give me advice on the difference between chemistry, biology, and physics. And my high school wasn't exactly a hotbed of college guidance. So therefore, I was gonna do physics, because that's all I really knew. It was either gonna be physics or medicine, right? That's quite often kind of the non-pure science degree. I'd never heard of engineering. I didn't know what engineering was. When I heard engineer, I thought of a train conductor. That was honestly what I thought of. When I heard electrical engineer, I thought of electrician. I remember one of my one of my TA, so in college you have TAs, which are like teachers, kind of. One of my TA's wife was a mathematician as an undergrad, and then she was applying to grad school, and she got into a PhD program in material science. Right, and she was math as an undergrad. Math's super hard. And I remember thinking, why is she going to become a seamstress? Like, I thought she was smart. Material science, just so you know, super hard. It's an engineering discipline where you learn how to invent new materials, you learn how to characterize materials, you learn what a new material is. Like, it's almost like engineering physics to a certain extent. It's like a blend between mechanical engineering, chemistry, chemical engineering, and I had never heard of this entire field. Ironically, I'm now a professor of chemical engineering and material science, so it's super ironic from my perspective that, you know, when I was a freshman undergrad, I thought material science was a seamstress. So that's why. That's how I ended up in physics as an undergrad. It was a very long answer. I'm sorry. Other questions? Yes. Raise your hand really high. Be brave. Great. Yeah. To get in? Yeah. So, honestly, I think it's because I got a 1580 on my SAT. Yeah. So, the SAT's out of when I took it, it was out of 1600. I think that was it. So I'm really good at taking standardized tests. I don't know why. I think that was it. But keep in mind, like the SAT, you don't need calculus, right? Like the SAT is basic math. So it really it was no indicator of if I would do well in physics. It was I would do well in geometry. But other than that, it wasn't super helpful. Mm-hmm. Yes, it's mine. Yes. So it's great. And my minions are here too. I say that fondly, like they're my children. So how faculty members work is you have something called a 40-40-20 distribution, which means you spend 40% of your time teaching, 40% of your time doing research, and 20% of your time doing service. So like this is considered service. Like coming out, really anything I do that's not research or teaching falls in that service bin. Research is like why it's called the Armani Research Lab, because it's my lab and we do research. Some faculty members name their research lab like a topic, like the biomimetics lab. I said I didn't want to do that. I felt it was constraining, right? I'm gonna be a professor for 50 years, right? When I started, we were doing integrated optics and we started inventing materials. Now we're doing biodetection. If I'm gonna name a lab and we're gonna do all those things, am I gonna call it the engineering lab, right? In order to capture a diversity of activities. So I decided to just call it my name and be done with it. The school made me name it something. So that was a USC thing. So as far as my research, we look at making new ways of detecting and understanding cancer. And a lot of stuff falls under that heading. So that's what we do in the research lab. In teaching, we teach. I teach. Pretty straightforward. Yay, lots of questions. Awesome. Yeah. So how do I didn't hear the, oh, okay. So how do I come up with new ideas? Lots of ways, really. So I run. I don't run because I like to run. I run because I like to eat Doritos. So if I run, I can eat Doritos. So it's really a means to an end. But while running, it gives me lots of time to think and try to draw connections between research. I also go to a lot of conferences that aren't necessarily in my comfort zone, and I talk to people who don't do what I do. If I talk to people who work in my area, all we're gonna do is talk about what we're doing, which is the same. If I talk to people who do different things, and I ask them what their problems are, then I can say, oh, that sounds like a really cool problem. I bet I can solve it. For example, one of the problems that one of my students is working on right now, we came up with the idea because I went to a conference that was on oncology, cancer, and I talked to an oncologist, cancer doctor, and he was telling me that he was having problems understanding and being able to detect where the tumor margins were during a surgery. And that when they would remove a biopsy from a patient during surgery, they would then have to send it off to pathology, which could then give them an answer back in a couple days. So during surgery, he just kind of had to guess, right? He was winging it. I don't want my oncologist to wing it during my surgery. That does not make me feel very comfortable. So I was like, this sounds like an interesting problem. I would like to solve this problem. I bet I can solve this problem. So then it's a matter of how am I going to solve the problem, right? So how I describe my lab, we're problem solvers. We may have to invent a new material to solve the problem. We may have to invent a new instrument to solve the problem, but we solve problems. So there's two ways to solve a problem, right? You can invent something and then try to force it for solving problems, or you can find a problem and then invent the solution for the problem. We identify problems and then invent solutions so that our solution is ideally suited for that problem. But first we have to find problems, and we find problems by talking to people. Talking to people is super helpful. Everyone has problems. Like, for example, women's heels, super uncomfortable. Yeah, I haven't solved that problem yet. Yeah, it's at the top of the list, but that's another problem. Questions over there?
Did you have any formative mentors after your physics tutor, and what did you gain from them?
So I had a lot of formative mentors, and I still have them. So I tell students that they shouldn't have a mentor. They should have a suite of mentors, because everybody is good at something, but not a single person is good at everything. So for example, right now I have I have a mentor that helps me on professional growth, so who helps introduce me to experts in the optics field, and who can help me develop my professional growth trajectory, right? So maybe becoming president of an optical society. And then I have a mentor on applying for funding in Department of Defense organizations. Hint. And then I have mentors who can help me apply for funding in NIH, or who can help me figure out how to get on study sections. And then I have mentors who can help me become a better mentor for my students. All right, so like what things I can do to nurture my students' growth, who also can help me troubleshoot when I have a student who perhaps isn't behaving appropriately. You know, because not all students should be mentored the same. And any teachers in the room know that every student is a little different. Some students you need to push a little bit. Some students you actually need to somehow unpush because they're a little stressed. So you somehow need to like rein them in, tell them they're doing fine, keep them from being detrimental to themselves because they're so anxious. You know, so how do you actually do that? So I have many mentors. If I tried to list off all of their names, I would forget someone, and this is being recorded, and then I'd hurt someone's feelings. So I don't even want to try. But I've had, easily 50 or 100 mentors, without even trying to think of them all. And I continue to have them, and I continue to add them. In fact, I'm meeting with one this afternoon who's at UCSD. That meeting was confirmed like an hour ago, so, which is great. Okay, we'll go here and then there. This side of the room's super quiet. Excellent, there's another question down there.
Yeah, so how did you decide to become a professor, and how did you land a position at USC, or did USC choose you?
So when I was a first and second year PhD student, I TA'd a class. So when I started my grad school, I thought I wanted to go into industry. I thought, I wanted to do really applied work at a company. And then I TA'd a class, my first year in grad school, and I really liked it. So it was a lab class. So it's a class where, I spent a lot of time with the students. We built stuff, which was also a lot of fun. And I actually got to help design the class. So it was the first year the class was taught. So as the TA, I actually got to help troubleshoot some of the experiments. And that was a lot of fun. It was also very different from my physics undergrad, where our lab classes were a little bit more theoretical and not as relevant. This class was like a new nanotech lab class. So it was very relevant and very applied. And I enjoyed it. So then the next year, I asked to TA another class. And I TA'd a graduate level, this is a really long name, non-equilibrium thermodynamics class, which basically explains why when you take water, it sometimes forms a sphere, and it sometimes forms like a pear shape. That's a super abbreviated description. And I really enjoyed that. And I really liked meeting with students and explaining concepts to students and helping to write final exams. And then I realized that if I like TAing and teaching, then I shouldn't get a job in industry. Because if I get a job in industry, I'm not going to get to teach. Like, that entire section of my job will not occur. So then I kind of shifted gears, and at this point I was like halfway through grad school. So I shifted gears and started to do more activities that would enable me to have a stronger resume so I could get that faculty position. So if you want a faculty position, you have to do something called a postdoc. So postdocs are like residencies for PhD students. So I got my PhD, I then did a postdoc, and then I applied for faculty positions. I applied for 40-ish. For reference, I applied for 2 undergrads. So 40 for me was a lot compared to 2 undergrad. I would not recommend applying to 2 schools now. That is not a suggestion. Apply for more than that. Again, that gets back to my advice that I got in high school. It was not good. So then I applied to 40 schools. I got interviews at a lot of places. And I'm married. So I was currently living in LA. And when you're married, you have to balance your husband and your demands. Needs, perhaps demand is a strong word. Wishes, desires, all of those things. So my husband and I had come to an agreement before I had applied that we would move to any major metropolitan city where I got a faculty position, unless I got a faculty position in LA at a top 10 engineering school. And USC is that. So it's a good engineering school, and we took the USC position. The day they called me and told me that they were making me an offer, he took the day off of work. And we drove to the engineering school and picked up the offer. Yeah. Because his company knew I was applying for positions, so they'd basically been putting him on short-term projects for 9 months. So it was impacting his work, just like it was, the uncertainty was impacting mine. So they showed me the offer. They matched every other offer I had, which then makes you wonder, maybe I should have asked for more? I mean, honestly, right? Because you're always told to negotiate. So then it's like, what? Clearly I didn't set the bar high enough. So then, I went and I talked to the dean, who's like the principal, and I asked him, I was like, so this is a great offer. What didn't I ask for? Because clearly there's something missing. And he's like, well, what you really should include that you didn't ask for is a travel fund for your first 4 years. I was like, great, I would like a travel fund. And he was like, great. He's like, how much would you like? I was like, $20,000? I was like, I don't know. I'm just tossing out numbers. And he's like, well, usually you justify it with how much it's going to cost you to travel. And I was like, $50,000? 20,000? I was like, I'll just keep going up. And he was like, how about we're gonna say you're gonna take 10 trips at $2,000 a trip and it'll be 20,000. I was like, awesome, let's do that. So he gave me a $20,000 travel fund. And so we negotiated up, and I got the job offer and signed it. So that's the general faculty. So you do apply. They don't just give you positions. That would be great. And that's the general process. So why don't we go with the question that was over here? Why don't we switch sides of the room? So the question was that clearly I have an interest in science, but I also have done a lot of STEM work, so how do I find a balance? Is that? Okay. So first, I don't have any children, which gives me time. So I view all of you as my children, just like I view all of the students in my research group as my children. So that gives me time to spend on my children. So that helps with the balance, because I view all of my STEM work as my hobby, right? Everybody has hobbies, but doing STEM work is what I really enjoy, right? And that's the key thing, right? That you enjoy your hobby. And I often get asked this question, right? Like, what do you do outside of work? Well, outside of work, I do this, right? Like, on weekends, I will hold STEM events for 1,000 children, but I don't view that really as work. Don't take away my funding. Okay, because it is a grant, so technically I get, but don't take it away. But I view that as something I do for fun, right? It's not something I do as a job. It's something I enjoy doing. And when you really enjoy doing something, it's not a work thing. And I guess that's the balance. So I don't really have to find a balance. It would be different if I had 3 children and a dog and my parents lived with me. Then I think it would be a lot harder. But I don't have that. I have my husband. My husband's also an electrical engineer. And he also contributes. He also enjoys it. He actually mentors a high school robotics team on the weekends. So he mentors a FIRST robotics team. So this is what we do. It's what we enjoy doing. So that's our balance. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So if you remember, when I was in high school, I liked biology, then chemistry, then physics, and then I had to choose one. And when I went to college, I still liked chemistry, and I still liked biology, but I wanted to graduate at some point, which is a good thing, because you have to pay a lot for college. It was expensive even then. It's more expensive now. So when I went to grad school in engineering, you don't pay for. Yeah, I didn't know this. So grad school in engineering, your advisor, in other words, someone like me, I pay for it. So I had tuition units. So I decided that I would explore that interest in biology and take it as an opportunity to take bio classes. And then when I did my postdoc, I actually did my postdoc in biology. So my thesis was on nonlinear optics, which basically means light, but very physics. And then my postdoc was on developmental biology. So I looked at how fish's heart develop. So it was very bio. But I had a lot of fun, and I learned a lot of different things, and I was able to kind of explore all of these different interests. And then, kind of at the end, when I was all done, now I run a lab that does some chemistry, some bio, some physics. So I actually never had to choose. And this gets to, my parents told me I was gonna have to choose. And now I can kind of say like, hey, you were wrong. That's like the best day, when you can actually tell your parents they were wrong, and you have like evidence. So that's kind of how I ended up doing a little bit of everything. I mean, I did choose as an undergrad, and now I just don't choose anymore. So I have one high school student in my lab. I have 12 undergrads in my lab right now, 13 PhD students, and 2 postdocs. So there's a wide age range. And all of them bring different things. So obviously the PhD students and postdocs bring intellectual things, right? They have degree programs, they have stamps of knowledge. The high school student doesn't necessarily have that, but they have enthusiasm, right? They are super excited to be there. And PhD students and postdocs can get jaded. You've been doing the same thing for 25 years. You can just get tired, right? You can also get very set in your ways, right? There can become a point where you know too much, and then you aren't willing to take a risk on something. Whereas in high school and as an undergrad, you don't know enough to know better, which there is a benefit to that. It actually does give you a competitive advantage over someone who knows more. So I've given projects to undergrads that I first assigned to grad students and postdocs, and the grad students and postdocs didn't want to do them because they said it was impossible. And then the high school students and undergrads actually showed they were possible, simply because the high school students and undergrads were willing to put in the time, and they also were willing to be creative enough to make it possible. So there's kind of a balance, right? It's both the creativity and just the stick-with-itness that different students bring to each problem. So I really try to build teams. Now, as far as expertise, I hire students from every field. Not literally, but computer science, mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, biomedical engineering, chemical engineering, industrial and systems engineering, chemistry, physics, biochemistry. I'm probably forgetting something, but pretty much everywhere. So it really creates like this melting pot of knowledge, and then they all feed off each other and they all teach each other. And all of their offices are like right next to each other. And then, so each office can hold like 5 students, and I try to mix up the offices so that they don't, like I don't have 4 electrical engineers in one office, and then all they do is talk about Maxwell's equations all day. So I try to make them talk about different things. Yep. So I like pretty much all of the different components of my job. I actually had an undergrad once ask me what was the least favorite aspect of my job, and it's committee work, which does fall into the service part. But committee work basically means, and you might find this strange, sitting and meeting with my peers. So, for example, a committee I'm on now, we are sitting and discussing the curriculum or the classes that the grad students have to take. And the reason why I like this the least is because this committee has literally been meeting for 4 years. And we've been having the same discussions for 4 years. And it's not going anywhere. So that's the problem. It can just be very frustrating. In contrast, like my classes, my students, every semester I teach the same class. It's a nanomaterials class. So we talk about the new types of materials, the new applications of the materials, kind of where the field is going. And so it's related to my research, but peripherally. But the class forces me to stay up to date on what's newest in the field. And it's an undergrad class, and it's a lab class. And the undergrads ask awesome questions that really keep me on my toes. So it's very entertaining for me, which is great. And the students are very engaged, and it's an elective class, so they don't have to be there. So the ones who are there want to be there, which is also really good. And it's at 8 a.m., so the ones who are there really want to be there, right? Because in college, you don't have to take an 8 a.m. class. I have it capped at 18 students, so it's also really small. So then I can really get to know all of the students and all about them. So for example, like this semester I have one student who's commuting from Bakersfield every day, which is really long commute. I have another student that has a child. Like I know details about them, about their lives, simply because it's such a small class, which makes it very rewarding as well. And then obviously I love my research, right? I have complete control over my research. So I really enjoy that. We'll go in the back. We haven't gotten anyone from that side in the back yet. Come on, Sam. I know
The one
you run.
person who wants a mic.
She runs like 7 miles a day. Maybe not in high heels.
Did your parents have certain expectations like for your studies, and were they surprised when you decided to be a physics major?
So they expected me to go to college. When I decided to major in physics, and I actually like went through with it, because I think they thought I was going to start it and then not do it. We had lots of discussions about what my job prospects would be, because they're both in business. So if I'd gotten a business degree, then they knew I would have a job. But we had lots of discussions about if I was going to get a job with a physics degree and what would that job be, and would I make a living, right? So we had that discussion a lot, especially my junior and senior year. And then when I told them I wanted to go to grad school, we had a lot of discussions about that, because they also didn't know that it would be free. And then I had to convince them that it was financially intelligent for me to go to grad school, because their comeback was, you know, so in grad school you make what's called a living wage, which means like right now the living wage is like $30,000 a year. So like it's sufficient, but it's not like you're making a lot of money. In contrast, if I was a physics undergrad, and keep in mind this was in like 2000, if I was a physics undergrad, the most common job was to go and be a quant on Wall Street. And as a quantitative analyst on Wall Street, I could make like 90K. So that's a salary gap that's significant. So I had to convince them that the 5 years of lost income from not going to Wall Street and instead going to grad school would be financially viable in the long run, and calculate what said crossover point would be. Also do projections on the increase in salary, in like my plateau salary, right? Because with the PhD I'll make more than being a quant on Wall Street, hypothetically. Now this is excluding the fact that I would be miserable on Wall Street. Like we're just taking that out of the equation. So also doing that calculus, and taking into account that if I invested, you know, you also had to take into account the investment income, because I'd be able to start contributing earlier to like a 401k if I went to Wall Street, whereas in grad school I wouldn't. So we had not only like qualitative discussions, we actually did quantitative discussions. And this is what happens when your parents are in business and do econ. Like you really have to defend your decisions, like with numbers. So it's a different analysis than perhaps a scientific analysis, but it still involves lots of graphs, lots of graphs. Yep. Yep. So there are lots of different pathways to get into labs, right? So the pathway I took is definitely not the standard one. The more conventional pathway is to email frequently and often. So you basically email faculty members, and if you don't get a response, a non-response is not a no. A non-response is they didn't read your email, they missed your email, they have 50 emails in their inbox, and yours went off the main screen, and it is now in the black hole of emails. So email often. A trick, email at like 3 in the afternoon, 3 to 4, or somewhere in that time frame. Emailing in the morning is like the worst time, because in the morning you get I get a ton of emails in the morning, because all the people on the East Coast are emailing me, as well as all the people on the West Coast, plus all the junk mail from like random people, like vendors and people like that. So in the morning I'm just getting like this churn of emails, whereas in the afternoon it's like maybe once every 15 minutes. So like I would actually see an email as opposed to just deleting stuff. So email in the afternoon. Also, the best time to actually catch a professor is to go to their class, right? Like wait outside of their classroom for them. Because they have to, they're supposed to be in class, right? I mean, occasionally I miss class, right? Just like occasionally your teachers miss class, right? But they're supposed to be in class, and that's the best time to catch them. And if you do it like 3 times, you'll definitely catch them. Or the person who is subbing for them can tell you where they are. But that's the easiest way to actually catch a professor. And then also ask around, right? Like other undergrads who are sophomores and juniors can tell you which faculty members are actually hiring, right? So they can actually tell you, like, oh, Professor X is, really cool and hires a bunch of undergrads. Professor Y hires maybe 1 every other year. So they can kind of tell you how to gauge which professors are going to be best worth your time to email. Is there, over there. I'm going to make Sam's job really hard. Be good.
So my question is, you went from humanities to physics to biology. So how did you overcome people telling you that you're too scattered and non-focused?
People still tell me I'm too scattered and non-focused. Yeah, that still happens. So I wouldn't necessarily say I've overcome it. So I don't necessarily have an answer for that. I'll try to think of it. Because I still meet with my colleagues in my office, and they say that they've read my group webpage, and they don't understand what we do, and they don't understand what our focus is. And we honestly don't really have like a singular focus. When I started, like 8 years ago, we had a singular focus. Like, we made lasers, and that was what we did. But then I realized to make better lasers, we needed to make new materials. I was like, okay, so we're gonna do that. And then I realized that, our lasers have really cool applications. We should do the applications too. And then I realized that, there are other applications kind of similar to the applications we're looking at now, but our lasers aren't really the best solution. We should come up with a different solution now that I really understand the problem. So let's do that. So then you just start exploring. And now we don't even really make lasers anymore because we've just gone off and done other things. So I completely agree when people say that they read our group webpage and they don't understand what we do, because I don't really understand what we do in terms of like a single focus. So I don't even really have like a rebuttal to people when they say that we're scattered, because I agree with them. I at least have a defense in that I like us being scattered, and I like the fact we work on a lot of different areas, because it means that my students get trained in a lot of different areas. When they leave, they know about a lot of different things, and they have a very well-rounded education. And we can also tackle a lot of different problems very easily. But I don't necessarily have a counter-argument that we're not scattered, for better or for worse. So it does affect our grant writing in a positive way, because we do a lot of things, which means we can apply for funding from a lot of different places. So right now, most of our funding actually comes from ONR. Thank you. But we have had NIH funding in the past. We also currently have IARPA funding, which is the Intelligence Advanced Research Projects Agency. And we've had DARPA funding as well for some of our integrated photonics work. We've had NSF funding. So we've had a lot of funding from a lot of different agencies. We also have industry funding for some of our more applied work. So it does help, in fact, it doesn't hinder, because when you're very, very focused, then there's really only one place you can apply for funding. Which can actually be a bad thing. One of my first mentors actually told me the most important thing as a faculty member is to have a balanced funding portfolio, just like having a balanced retirement portfolio. So that if one thing of funding, if one area of funding, like the federal government, goes away, you still have the others to count on. So you don't completely defund your research group. Yeah. So advice, we'll start there. So part of the challenge is that grad school is 5 years long. The first year when you start, it's like starting college or starting high school, right? It's your first year, it's super exciting, everything is new. Whenever you first start something, it's great. Then you come into your second year. It's a little less exciting. You're looking forward. You have 4 more years of this to go, maybe 4.5. It's a little daunting, but you know you're still in it to win it. Then you come into your third year. You still have a couple more years to go. You can't really see the end of the tunnel, right? But you've been in it now for like 2.5 years, so you can't really see the beginning of the tunnel either. If your experiments aren't working, you really can't see the end of the tunnel. And you haven't really had anything to celebrate. So that's when like the dark time hits, is when you haven't had anything good happen for like a solid 2.5 years, and you can't see where you're going or how you're gonna get there. Usually that's when the problem happens. And that's when I will pair up a grad student with an undergrad or a high school student, because the undergrad and high school students are just happy to be there. Whether things are working, whether they aren't working, whether chemicals are getting ordered, whether chemicals aren't getting ordered, they're just super excited when they take their first picture under the microscope. Even if that first picture is of a silicon wafer and there's nothing on it, just to have the picture. And that enthusiasm bumps up the grad student's attitude, because they remember what it was like when they took their first picture. And it re-inspires them and reinvigorates them back to that initial first year state. So it's like a reset. And then they're able to get over that kind of hurdle. Because if you're doing an experiment and your attitude is negative, your experiment will never work. So you should just stop doing it. Because if you think it won't work, it definitely won't work. Like I can guarantee you. If you go up to a microscope and you're like, this microscope isn't gonna work, it won't. Even if the person before it turned it on and it worked, you're just gonna turn it on wrong. You're gonna forget to turn on the lamp. You'll have the lamp turned down. You will make it not work. Just your attitude towards it. So then the undergrad comes in, bumps them up, then everything starts working, typically. It's very entertaining to watch this happen over and over again. It's a very good system. And then everything works. They go into their fourth year, they have papers, everything's moving along swimmingly, and then they graduate. So now, did it happen to me? Yes, for a different reason. So when I started grad school, I went to Caltech to work with a professor named John Crocker. John's fabulous. My first day at Caltech, John pulled me aside and told me he was leaving and going to UPenn. I'd been at Caltech for a day, right? He told me I could go with him, but I went to Caltech because I'd been at University of Chicago, and it snows in Chicago. I'm assuming everyone knows that. And I didn't want to be where it snowed. Like, that was actually one of my criteria. So I didn't want to go to UPenn because it also snows there. So I was like, no, I'm good. I will find a new advisor. So I did. I went and started working with Harry Atwater. Harry, also fabulous. Now, 10 weeks in, Harry brings the whole group together and says, I'm thinking about moving to Harvard. What? I'm cursed. So I was like, okay. He's like, I'm willing to float all of you for a couple quarters. You can move with me. You can not move with me. It's entirely up to you. And I was like, I just have a question. If we're a first-year grad student, is our coursework going to transfer? Like, or are we going to have to, redo this first year? Because the first year in grad school is your master's coursework, and it's horrible. And he was like, yeah, if you haven't passed candidacy, you have to retake your coursework. Like, no, not doing that. Like, it was bad the first time. I don't need to take it a second time. So he's like, okay. He's like, I will support you until you find a new advisor. So I found another new advisor in someone named Pat Collier, who was in the chemistry department. So then Pat was an assistant professor. He was like a first-year assistant professor. He was super nice, but hadn't really figured out how to be a professor. So if you're talking about mentors, there are both mentors who are role models on how to be a professor. There are also mentors and role models on how not to do something. And that was Pat. So I was in Pat's group for 3 months and realized that I didn't want to be in Pat's group. So I started looking for other groups. And at this point, I cast a wide net, like Caltech, UCLA, UCSB, USC, UCSD. I was looking all over Southern California. Because also by this point, I'd been dating the person who is now my husband for a year. And I'd done things like fly to Turkey to meet his family. Like it was serious. So I ended up finding an advisor at Caltech, someone named Carrie Vahala. And when I first went to Caltech, I wanted to do biophysics. And Carrie Vahala did nonlinear quantum optics, which is not biophysics. But it was fine. I was going to get a PhD, and then I could do whatever I wanted afterwards. So I got a PhD, and I did other stuff afterwards. And I worked really hard to get the PhD as fast as humanly possible because I hated every minute of it. But I got it, and it was done, and I don't do anything I did in my grad school now other than use lasers, and that's pretty much it. And I'm sure that's a new story for my students. So, yeah.
Based off on everything that you've said about your life, I think you've had an amazingly non-traditional academic life. I really admire you. And my question is, how do you think you're helping society improve or change with everything you've done in your life?
So how do I think I'm helping society improve? So I think one of my goals is to simply draw awareness to the fact that non-traditional paths are totally possible, right? Like everyone thinks that to get a degree, an undergrad or a PhD in science and engineering, you have to have the traditional take AP classes in high school, you have to come from a solid, or there's like a checklist, right? And if you don't do that checklist, you aren't going to be successful. And sure, the checklist is great and your life will be easier, but that doesn't mean if you skip a step in the checklist, you can't make it up, right? It means you're going to have to work harder, but you can work harder. It is possible to make it up. It just means you're going to have to grin and bear it a little bit. And also, like a lot of my experiences, like for example, I was the only girl in my physics class, and I'm often asked to talk about my experiences in STEM as a woman. But my experiences in STEM aren't going to be your experiences in STEM, because your experiences are with, the increase in females in STEM now. So you won't have the experience of being the girl. You might have the experiences of being one of 5 or one of 10, but it's a lot easier to be one of 10 than one of 1. The problem with one of 1 is you're the one that gets called on because the professor knows your name, which is not cool. But one of 10, you can kind of blend in, so it's a lot easier. You're camouflaged. So that's the bigger picture, is just to show an alternative path, because everybody likes to talk about the easy route and make it sound like that's the only route. But there are lots of pathways, as long as you are really focused and really determined to do what you want to do.
So building on that, is there anything when you look back at your path that you would change?
I would probably, so I didn't mention this, Harry Atwater went to Harvard. And then in my 3rd year, he actually moved back to Caltech. I would probably have changed back into his research group. Yeah. Harry and I are still friends, so it's not like there's a grudge. But I think I would be much happier now if I had him as my official PhD advisor of record, simply because what he does and what I do now are more closely aligned. His research group is also very scattered, so we also have that in common. And whereas my thesis advisor and I, we don't really have anything in common, which means if you're thinking about a mentor, Harry is much more of a long-term, lifelong mentor than my advisor is. So having that official, stamped relationship would make my life now easier. But that said, it's fine. This is just something that, is another facet of my education. Yes, we'll go over here.
So you talked about your work in humanities in high school.
Mm-hmm.
In college, did you continue doing anything in humanities, or did you primarily focus on STEM?
So at University of Chicago, first of all, you're forced to, which, at the time I thought was horrible, but now I understand is actually a good thing. I also did participate in a couple clubs as an undergrad, but instead of actually doing mock trial or youth ledge or something like that, I actually played soccer. Keep in mind, University of Chicago's Division III. This isn't indicative of anything. I could have probably played football, football, not soccer football, because again, Division III. So instead I played soccer just for fun. Also, so I wouldn't be horribly out of shape when I graduated. So I chose to do that instead. Finite time. Yes.
So I live in West Virginia, and West Virginia is kind of notorious for not the best education systems, especially in more areas than necessarily, not mine, but other areas. So do you think if you would have had or lived in an area that had better funding, do you think maybe your experience would have been different and maybe you wouldn't be where you're at now?
I think maybe yes, maybe no. So I think my college would have been a lot easier, without a doubt. On the other hand, in college, I learned what I was capable of, right? So I really learned that I could be presented with something really hard, and I could get over it. Whereas in high school, I was never really challenged, which, is a good thing, but also a bad thing. Because until you're really pushed, you don't really know what you can do. Whereas in college, my first quarter, I was really challenged. And then when I got to grad school, right, so, high school to college, you kind of get narrowed, right? So you suddenly go from being perhaps the smartest or second smartest person in your high school to suddenly being one of the smartest or second smartest person in everyone's high schools. So suddenly you're with everybody who's super smart, and there's no guarantee that you're going to be that smartest person. So it becomes more competitive. And then the same thing happened when I went to grad school, right? I went from being one of the smart people to, oh my God, everyone here is super smart. But I knew that because I'd done it as an undergrad, I knew I was up to the challenge. So I had that confidence to know that I could make this happen. I had to work hard. I had to, once again, dig deep, but I was confident I could do this. And then the same thing happened when I started my faculty position. I had a lot of people telling me what I could and what I couldn't do, especially when I started moving more into the medical area. Because a lot of people, for example, NIH funding, I was told, engineers don't get NIH funding. And I was like, well, that's nonsense. Why? I was like, I can get NIH funding. And then I applied, and then I got NIH funding. And everybody's like, you shouldn't have gotten it. And I was like, well, great. I will keep that in mind. I don't know what to say to that. So I just, just because if you automatically exclude yourself from something, then you're saying no before you give someone else the chance to say no. And there's absolutely no reason to do that. Let them say no. And people say no to me all the time, which is fine. Right? I apply for all kinds of things and it gets rejected, which is fine. I get nominated for awards that I don't get, which is fine. The important thing is just to not let the negative things really stick to you, just to focus on the positive things. And really celebrate the positive things. So in our research group, whenever something good happens, we really celebrate it. because it's so easy to let negative things just fester inside of you, and then the positive things aren't able to overcome that just festering negativity. So we really try to focus on the positive things. Am I going over? Oh, you'll stop me. Good. Okay. Other questions? There's actually several over here. I'm sorry, Sam.
I'm coming over.
You should have gotten Vin. So I have 3 PhD students here.
Only one who likes to run, unfortunately.
So how long it took you to complete all that education, and what was your motivation through all those years?
That's a really good question. So I think my initial motivation for undergrad was simply that it was expected of me, right? Which is not really a motivation. My motivation for going to grad school was my job options for undergrad were basically high school teacher or quant on Wall Street. And I didn't really like either of those. And it's really lucky I didn't like the quant option, because this was 2000, and then like 2001 and 2002 were not good Wall Street years. All the high school students in here may not know that. All the people over the age of like 45 probably know it. So yeah, so it was really good I didn't go that career path. And then when I got into grad school, you know, I could have stopped at the master's, but I really liked the research component of it. And so that's really what drove me through, was knowing kind of what was at the end of the tunnel, that I could get a job doing research, really drive my own career. And that's really the difference between a bachelor's degree and a PhD. And, you know, again, a PhD isn't for everyone, right? If you have a PhD, you're really going to be kind of in charge of whatever it is, and not everybody wants that. Not everybody wants that responsibility. But I'm, you know, and I know this about myself, I'm incredibly determined and stubborn, and I do not take orders well. So, which is fine. And I mean, I'm more than happy to admit when I'm wrong, which I admit all the time. But at the same time, I do not, I like to be able to do things and explore ideas that I find interesting. And the only way I'm going to be able to do that is if I'm leading my own research group and I have that opportunity. And in order to do that, I really needed a PhD. So that, the idea of what the PhD was going to enable me to do is really what drove me. When I was a senior high school student, I actually also thought about getting a music degree, because I really liked flute a lot. I actually applied to several music programs. Yeah. And my parents hid all of the acceptance letters. Yeah. And I only got them 5 years ago. Yeah. So my parents, my freshman year, my first year, boxed up my room. Like, I came home from college, my entire room was boxed up. They had painted it, put new like linens on the bed, and moved my dad's desk in. So that was my bedroom. Like, it was no longer my room. It was a guest room. I got to sleep in there when I came home from college, but like, it was not my room. But they literally, when they said they boxed up my room, they took drawers and just dumped them into boxes. So it was everything. And then when I bought a house a few years ago, they sent the boxes. So it was like a time capsule. Like, there were Tic Tacs in the boxes. Like, they didn't clean anything out. I mean, they could have at least removed like food. So in these boxes, they also put stuff that they'd hidden from me, like college letters. So as I'm emptying these boxes and going through them, I'm like, oh, it's a letter from Emory. Like, huh, interesting. So I open it up and I'm like, I was accepted. Like, huh, interesting. Okay, I'm thinking it's probably too late for me to send a reply. Couple years too late, okay. So then I go and show this to my husband, and he's like, wow, that would have been a different career path. I was like, yeah, it would have. So then I think back to like a lot of these decisions I had to make with relatively little guidance. And I remember when I was trying to choose like music or science, one of the things that actually my flute teacher told me was I can always play the flute, right? It's very portable. It's truly very portable. But I can't do science anywhere, right? I'm not gonna own my own electron microscope. It's a little expensive. I'm not gonna be able to have a fume hood in my garage unless I'm Elon Musk. So that is really what, helped me choose between that fork in the road. And I still occasionally play music, not as much as I would if I'd gone to a music conservatory. But, I do science every day, which is really, what my passion ended up being. I think there was another question I saw somewhere on this side of the room. Yes. I have 4 minutes.
Okay, you can do it. What kind of advice do you have for students and teachers of those of us who live in rural areas and aren't in love with the idea of big cities because we like our rural background? And where can these kids bring STEM back to our rural areas and still earn a living wage at it?
Yeah. So that's a great question. I'd say there's a two-part solution. First, there's a lot of amazing things on YouTube. And I know that Chevron and IEEE and like Northrop Grumman and Lockheed and a lot of the big companies are now putting 30-second and 45-second mini interviews with their engineers on YouTube. Like, why did you become an engineer? What do you do as an engineer? What does a scientist do? Which I actually also show to my college students. Because college students are getting, for example, a degree in chemical engineering, but they don't actually know what that means, right? Because when you take chemical engineering or electrical engineering coursework, that's giving you a foundation, but that's not actually what you're gonna do, right? You aren't actually just gonna sit and solve Maxwell's equations or make reactors all day in your job. So those videos I think are really helpful to help students figure out, what do they wanna do? Because the degree is really just an enabling pathway to that job. So just going through and watching those little 30-second, 45-second snippet videos. And a lot of the different professional societies, like Optical Society of America, American Chemical Society, Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, which is IEEE. So a lot of these professional societies also have little tiny boxes, like the OSA has the optics blocks, something like that, which are basically demo boxes and give students hands-on activities to learn different science and engineering concepts, but they're actually modern, right? I remember when I was an undergrad, or a high school student, we did gravity with a ball and a chute, and that was my physics experiment. Keep in mind, lasers weren't really readily available. The optics one, they have laser pointers as a diode. They have 3 different color LEDs. They have lenses, prisms, mirrors, filters, mirrors with filters, and I think the entire box is $50. So then, because they have 3 different color LEDs, you can also merge them and see white light. So it can really help make kind of engineering a reality. It also allows you to have the discussion about the difference between a laser pointer and an LED, and the difference in intensity and divergence and all those types of concepts. So a lot of kind of tapping into that society network. And that's actually one of the goals of those society networks. And I'm being cut off. So thank you very much, everyone.